Brothers and sisters, I am head Scribe Blackbird of the USBOS, and today I offer you a question. What do the films Mission Impossible 8, Terminator 3, and 2012 all have in common? The answer is, they each prominently feature a doomsday vault. And though the vaults of the films are fictional, they come from a real-world precedent that already exists, and has existed for a long time. Humanity has always sought to preserve our knowledge, culture, and world, be it at the Library of Alexandria, aboard the Voyager probes, or within the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And so in this episode of The Steel Lantern, we will explore the vaults of today, what they preserve, why they exist, and what each of us can do to ensure humanity's knowledge and culture endure. Before we get into discussing the vaults that exist today, I want to tell you something important. You, the person watching this right now. You who might be hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. These vaults are not built out of fear. They're not monuments to loss or tombs for what we've failed to protect. No, see, we build them out of faith. Faith that there will always be someone there to carry that knowledge forward, even if the worst comes to pass. As humans, we have an inherent need to build up those who come after us. You can call it a biological drive to protect offspring, or an adaptation for social roles, but it's all the same at the end of the day. We build them out of love. Okay, let's get this show on the road. We're going to talk about 10 interesting vaults that go in order of the oldest vaults to the newest. So that means our first up is the Crypt of Civilization. The Crypt of Civilization has deep historical roots. It all starts with a man named Thornwell Jacobs. Jacobs was born in 1877 in South Carolina, the son of a Presbyterian minister, and he followed in his father's footsteps. As a pastor himself, he ended up deeply involved in many religious publications in the southern U.S. He was drawn to Georgia after the Atlanta Massacre of 1906, which were anti-black race riots that lasted 4 days and left at least 24 African Americans dead. The Atlanta Massacre inspired Jacobs to write his 1908 novel, The Law of the White Circle, which remains as a thought-provoking and insightful reflection on racial conflict of the Progressive Era South. Jacobs himself calls it a sociological study, intended to make the reader think. The book is actually in the public domain and free to read thanks to the Internet Archive. I'll go ahead and drop a link to it in the description for anyone interested. It's a fascinating read. Jacobs returned to Atlanta in 1909 and ultimately reopened Oglethorpe University in 1913, with the university having been initially closed due to the Civil War. Jacobs would go on to serve as the university's president for almost 30 years, and during that time, he continued writing. In the late 1920s, he was researching for a novel set in ancient Egypt and found it frustrating how limited information was available about the daily lives of the ancient Egyptians, with only pieces preserved in tombs. And that hit close to home. He realized that even the greatest civilizations can vanish, and with them, the record of who they were. Jacobs wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. And this is what ultimately gave him the idea for the Crypt of Civilization. The premise was simple: a modern-day Egyptian-style tomb, sealed from air and the passage of time. After flirting with the idea for a few years, the project was officially started in August of 1937. Over the next 3 years, Jacobs and scientist Thomas K. Peters collected everything for the vault. The goal was to encompass the broad strokes of human civilization of the 1930s, while also keeping record of the past 6,000 years. Some of the items include a plastic figure of Donald Duck, a bottle of Budweiser beer, and a can opener. There were also over 800 books preserved, including the likes of the Quran, Dante's Divine Comedy, and Homer's Iliad. The microfilms were even more interesting. Voice recordings of various world leaders at the time were preserved, including even Adolf Hitler. In case electricity was no longer in use when the crypt was opened, a windmill was included to provide a source of power for the microfilm readers and projectors. Once Jacobs and Peters felt they'd gathered all they needed, the crypt was finally sealed for good on May 28, 1940. Jacobs figured that 6,177 years had passed since the start of the ancient Egyptian calendar by that point, so he decided that the Crypt of Civilization wouldn't be opened for another 6,177 years. That means you and I definitely won't live to see it open in the 82nd century on the 28th of May in the year 8113. There's a lot more that I didn't mention for time, like their preservation methods and some of the other figures involved. So I highly recommend you do some more reading on the Crypt of Civilization because it's simply fascinating. Oglethorpe University is still keeping track of their time capsule, which I'll include the link to in the description below. Don't expect a lot of changes, though. Still, it's incredible to think how one man, back in the 1930s, looked at the ruins of the past and decided to build something for the future, which is actually the exact opposite situation for our second vault, the Granite Mountain Records Vault. The Granite Mountain Records Vault, located over 600 feet deep in the Wasatch Mountains near Salt Lake City, is the largest collection of genealogical records in the world. Created by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known to some as the Mormons, it houses over 3.5 billion images from over 100 countries on a combination of microfilm, microfiche, and digital record. Those of you who don't know much about the Mormons are probably scratching your heads. What does a church founded in the 1830s have to do with genealogical record keeping? Well, let me add a little context. On November 1st, 1894, the Genealogical Society of Utah was founded by Franklin Dewey Richards, James Henry Anderson, and Amos Milton Musser. These men were pretty influential in the early Mormon church, particularly Richards, who was the GSU's first president until 1899. To save you a bit of time here, I'll just say that they didn't actually start collecting microfilms until 1938, after which they created the vault in 1965. For security reasons, guests aren't allowed into the records vault, but much of their collection has been digitally archived. That digital collection has been available to the public since 1999 via their website, Family Search, which you may have actually used if you've ever used the eponymous website or one of the sites they share databases with, like Ancestry.com and MyHeritage. The GSU, now known as the Family History Department, still maintains both the Records Vault and the Family Search website. The Granite Mountain Records Vault is a testament to the capabilities of collaborative efforts, and how not all of the vaults have to be as disconnected from the world as the Crypt of Civilization. But both of these vaults are very fixated on the past. Well, the Crypt of Civilization used to be about now, but now their now isn't our now. So what about the now, or the now that hasn't happened yet? That's what the next vault is all about. The Long Now. The Long Now Foundation was founded in 1996 in San Francisco. It's largely the brainchild of author Stuart Brand, musician Brian Eno, and computer scientist William Hillis. One of the initial problems the Long Now sought to address wasn't even cultural, but technological. It's a formatting limitation known as the year 10,000 problem, or the Y10K problem. That name might make you think of the Y2K bug, if you're old enough to remember it, and that's not too far off base. The Y2K bug, if you don't know, was a largely hypothetical computing bug due to rolling over from the year 1999 to the year 2000. It got everybody in a tizzy, with some dramatically predicting it would cause a massive, wide-scale technological breakdown. They thought every computer would fail, in everything from banking systems to nuclear power plants. Basically, people whipped themselves up into a panic thinking it would send us back into the Dark Ages. In reality, not much happened. Most computers handled the rollover easily. The Y10K problem, on the other hand, deals with a different issue. Most computational date formatting has a 4-digit slot. Think 1979 or 2006 or 2112. In theory, most computers should be able to handle everything up to 9,999. But that's when the Y10K problem arises. Because what happens when it turns into the year 10,000, a 5-digit number? Even though the concern is nowhere near on the levels of the Y2K hysteria, it's still an important consideration for future-proofing technology. As the concerns about future-proofing expanded beyond just computing, so did the scope of the long now, which now sees itself as a living library. As of 2025, the Long Now Foundation has several interesting projects going on, and I'll briefly touch on a few of them for you. The first I want to mention is the Clock of the Long Now, also known as the 10,000-year clock. Originally conceived in 1989 by Hillis, it's a mechanical clock that is designed with the Y10K problem in mind. Unlike ordinary clocks that measure seconds, minutes, and hours, this one measures by years, centuries, and even millennia. In fact, it's designed to only chime once every 1,000 years. As of 2025, it's still in the works. When it's completed, it'll be on the top of Mount Washington in Nevada. But right now, you can check out a scale model of it on display in the Fort Mason Center if you're ever in San Francisco. The next big project of the Long Now Foundation is the Rosetta Project, which is a global collaboration to create a modern Rosetta Stone for languages. The Rosetta Stone, if you don't know, was an ancient Egyptian stela, or stone writing tablet, discovered in 1799. It was a crucial historical find because it contained the same text, translated across 3 separate scripts: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Egyptian Demotic, predecessor of Coptic, and ancient Greek. Since ancient Greek was already well documented, this tablet became the breakthrough that finally allowed us to understand hieroglyphics, and with that, much of ancient Egypt itself. It was a big deal. Even today, the Rosetta Stone is recognized for its massive impact on linguistics. If you've ever looked for a language learning program, you've probably seen Rosetta Stone, named in its honor. The Long Now's Rosetta Project follows that same spirit, but instead of just being a clever namesake, it aims to serve a similar purpose. By creating both a digital language archive and matching written reference book, but also by creating an object called the Rosetta Disk. The disk is a pure nickel sphere, micro-etched with over 13,000 pages worth of text from 1,500 languages. The first line, readable with the naked eye, explains in 8 languages that the rest of the text must be magnified 1,000 times for legibility. It's the hope of the Long Now Foundation that the Rosetta Disk, or the accompanying written archive, will be able to act as a Rosetta Stone to the people of the future, for all the languages contained therein. The Rosetta Disk already exists, and has since 2004. It's been updated several times since then, including a limited edition of wearable Rosetta Disks in 2017. You can also check out a digital version on their website, which I'll link below. The last of the Long Now Foundation's projects that I want to discuss is the 10,000-Year Library, also known as the Manual for Civilization. This is the actual living library that the Foundation refers to itself as. Started in 2014, it's a collection of over 3,500 books, crowd-curated with the goal of preserving a record of humanity today for our descendants. Like the Crypt of Civilization, the 10,000-Year Library is an effort to capture the many voices of the world we live in. But unlike the Crypt, it also aims to give our descendants a head start on rebuilding, with entire sections focused on how-to books and practical guides for things like foraging, machinery, and navigation. The Long Now Foundation has several other projects, like the Long Bet Project, Revive and Restore, and the Nevada Bristlecone Reserve, but I'll leave them for you to look into. As always, I'll pop the relevant links into the description below. So, as you can see, the Long Now Foundation is a great example of how a vault doesn't always have to be a physical vault. Through its many projects, it's doing a lot of the legwork to preserve our culture, our history, and our world. But so far, we've discussed universities, religious organizations, and nonprofits. But what about the government? Well, don't you worry, dear viewer, the US government has you covered. The United States government likes to keep records. The National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, is the record keeper on a national scale. Now, obviously, not all of those records are on a federal scale. Newspapers, newsreels, things like that aren't really in a federal purview. But tax returns, military personnel information, and restricted files are federal records. And until very recently, a lot of those records were of the ink and paper variety, not digital. That means they had to be kept in pretty specific conditions. Heat, light, humidity are all the enemies of preservation. So naturally, records need to be stored in places that are cold, dark, and dry. And if you're looking for all that, then what's better than underground? In 1997, the National Archives opened their first federal records center underground. Over 60 feet down in a limestone mine just outside of Kansas City, federal records were preserved underground for the first time. Now, it's important to note that the National Archives had been taking advantage of underground storage since the 50s, but 1997 was the first time it was done for federal documents specifically. That first location in Lee Summit, Missouri is still going strong today. The National Archives also has 3 other underground facilities, one in Lenexa, Kansas that opened in 2003, one in Valmeyer, Illinois from 2008, and most recently in Kansas City proper in 2012. And of course, that's just what they've got underground, and what they publicly tell us about. So far, we've looked at a lot of types of vaults from across the 20th century, all the way from the 30s to the 90s. We've talked about vaults for everything from snapshots of a moment in time, to government files, to preserving languages. But I told you this was a list of 10 vaults. And that's true. But this is actually going to have to be a 2-part video. Because from this point on, we're going to start shifting gears to focus more on modern vaults. The 21st century brought with it a whole slew of new concerns, especially around technology, climate change, and a shift in the way we interact with media. There's a lot of things I want to get into with those vaults, but this video has already gotten so long that I feel like I would have to skimp on details or rush through in order to try and keep this video from getting way too long. So that's why I've decided to make this into a 2-part video. I hope you can understand my reasoning, and I hope you'll come back around for the next part. But now, I've already given myself a ton of work with this script, so I'm going to leave things off here for now. If you take away anything from this video, let it be this. For far longer than you and I have been here, people have worked hard to make sure that something was still around for us to inherit. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Like I said earlier, we humans have always felt this drive to preserve what makes us who we are. And no matter the reason you give it, that's not gonna change. Because that's just who we are. Ad Victoriam.